all see that? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kerry Aprile from the School of Education and the Arts, and I'm actually co-presenting today with Associate Professor Rickie Fisher. I think you've all seen him travelling incognito a little bit earlier before we started. So Rickie and I have both been involved in the project that we're actually going to take you through today. So good morning, Rickie, as well. Okay, apart from all of the sorts of impacts of COVID-19 that actually affected spheres of social, economic, political or educational activity that could be considered critical, our presentation today focuses on just one example drawn from our initial teacher education courses, where the circumstances, timing and government policies that accompanied the first wave of the virus in Australia and in Queensland in particular indeed created a critical situation for our mid-year graduates who were to become fully fledged registered teachers in June 2020 if everything went according to plan. To set the scene, I want to explore how we're going to understand the term critical in this presentation. So the word actually has many meanings. In fact, the Merriam-Webster dictionary lists 13 separate applications of the word critical. So to scientists, they might talk about a critical mass, or engineering, a critical temperature, etc. There's not a nurse in the world who wouldn't understand somebody being diagnosed with a critical condition, etc. So these are just some of the definitions that actually applied in the situation to the pre-service teachers who are confronted by the challenges and the importance and sense of immediacy that accompanied their course completion in June. For each of these, the definitions that are shown here applied to their circumstances. So the capstone assessment task or experience that defines the work readiness and eligibility to graduate from an initial teacher education course actually requires students to demonstrate 37 professional standards in what are termed critical tasks. Now, in that context, criticality actually refers to meeting the minimum benchmark required to be able to operate as an autonomous professional. Now, for these students, most of those tasks are demonstrated in practice in an authentic context. So teaching in a classroom with real live students. And that's understood in initial teacher education to be crucial to demonstrating their work readiness. It also represents the turning point or important juncture that defines the change from being a pre-service teacher to a professional with license to teach upon graduation. Now, as luck might have it, the disruption caused by school closures earlier this year actually coincided with the scheduled placements where these students would be assessed as work ready and as the determination for their graduation. So as a result of that, finding viable solutions that wouldn't impede their course completion became an issue of utmost importance. It also was quite challenging to deal with. While addressing these concerns actually gave rise to the project that Rickie and I were involved in called the Learning at Home Work Integrated Placement, analysis of the outcomes for our students revealed far more than just a convenient workable fix for the immediate problem. In our presentation, we want to show that these students actually received or achieved a level of workplace readiness that could be defined as a defining concept of their professionalism. Now, Barnett, way back in 1997, stole this concept or this idea from its original setting in physics, where it actually refers to the self-sustainability of a nuclear chain reaction. So in lots of ways, for Barnett, professionalism was determined by the ability to self-sustain professional learning and professional practice after graduation, so demonstrating autonomy. And he actually posed the idea that that involved understanding self, understanding the world, and understanding the leverage that your body of professional knowledge gave you to be able to enact change and respond to unusual or critical circumstances. So Johnson and colleagues actually refer to that as 3 types of thinking and action that actually characterise the term criticality in higher education. They refer to the need for graduates to actually leave higher education settings with the ability to exercise critical thinking, critical self-reflection, and critical action. I'm now going to hand over to Rickie so that he can actually describe the context for the solution that responded to the needs of these graduating students and resulted in the features of criticality that we observed that align with this framework and definition. Thanks, Rickie.
Excellent. Thank you, Kerry, for that introduction and context to what we're working in here. So, as Kerry spoke about, we had a small group of Master of Teaching students, so Master of Teaching Primary and Master of Teaching Secondary, who were unable to complete a placement within a school. So, essentially, the problem is it was the disruption to the WIL placements for graduating pre-service teachers as a result of school closures and schools moving to remote learning. One thing that I will actually explain to you here is we're not talking about our students working with teachers in a remote learning context. So that wasn't even on the cards for us to as an option. So this was a complete replacement for students engaging in a practicum experience, simply because schools were closed, schools were not able to host student teachers because there were a whole lot of bans on visitors coming onto campuses. So that's where this creative solution needed to be developed to enable our students to demonstrate those Australian professional standards at graduate career stage, to enable them to graduate and become a registered teacher mid-year this year. And I can actually say that every single one of those students who participated in that program completed, graduated, and are now fully registered teachers. So that is an absolutely wonderful outcome for us that was able to happen. So the Learning at Home initiative was originally developed by Griffith University. Because they were in a bigger pickle than we were, because their teacher education graduates in every single one of their courses actually complete mid-year. So therefore, every single one of their students could not go into school and engage in a normal practicum where a student teacher would be placed with a supervising teacher in a class or classes and enact their demonstration of the standards. So essentially there was a range of approval processes that needed to go in place, because to replace an in-school experience where students were demonstrating the criticality that Kerry spoke about in terms of the demonstration of those professional standards. It needed to be something that not necessarily replicated that experience, because you could never ever replicate the experience of someone being in a classroom as a final year student, delivering learning, teaching, planning, managing, those kinds of things. So an alternate task needed to be developed, and that was what was referred to as the Learning at Home initiative, which had to be approved by the Professional Standards Committee of the Queensland College of Teachers. So they are our registration body, and they approve any amendments to the courses that we deliver. So a lot of work needed to happen with the HEIs in consultation with the College of Teachers to ensure that that replacement for a final year, final term professional experience met their professional standards and program standards to enable students to then graduate. And what was developed was actually, and Kerry and I have spoken about this regularly, we believe it was actually far superior to a final year teaching experience, and a much challenging experience for our students. And I think that we have created graduates who think very, very differently as a result of engaging in this process. Next slide, please, Kerry. So just to provide you with the context here, you can see here on this slide the difference between a traditional placement in a school where a student teacher would be placed in a school to complete their placement with a supervising teacher, enacting, planning, teaching, assessing, and students in a face-to-face context. So that was just not available to us for this small group of students. So we needed to be able to provide them with a way around doing that. So as you can see there, the tasks were the creation of audio and video resources that supported remote learning. So the Department of Education and the Queensland Department of Education created a Learning at Home website, which had a series of resources uploaded for parents to access. This task was for our students to complement those resources that were already there with additional resources to unpack and create a more user-friendly approach to the resources that were there. The conditions of a normal in-school experience would be where a pre-service teacher would deliver the curriculum as directed by their allocated supervising teachers. Now, this context that our students were working in, they had a choice of the content that they wanted to work in, and also had a choice of the year level that they wanted to work in based on what was available to them on that Learning at Home website. So students went in and they selected the learning area from the Australian curriculum that they wanted to focus on. In a traditional practicum, student teachers, pre-service teachers would complete a series of tasks performed with a given class. So it would be for a known group of students. Our pre-service teachers, they profile their learners, they understand the dynamics in the classroom, and they teach to that particular cohort. Whereas what they did in this virtual experience was they were creating resources for an unknown group. So the way they approached the task, they needed to approach them quite differently to ensure that they were able to be used in a range of different contexts, and also for a range of different learner types. In a traditional placement, it is the responsibility of the student teacher, it's their individual responsibility to manage their placement, to go through and make sure they are doing what they should be doing to enable them to demonstrate the professional standards. In the virtual experience, it was more working as part of a team. So they were put in small groups, and the negotiation that the students needed to do in consultation with Kerry and also with a mentor that they were allocated from the department to work through and problem solve those issues to get to the point where they had high quality products at the end. Feedback in a traditional in-school experience would be completed by a supervising teacher. So the supervising teacher there at the back of the classroom, watching the pre-service teacher teach, providing them with feedback and ongoing feedback throughout their teaching experience across their what would be a 20-day placement, as opposed to the shift that happened with this context where the focus was placed more on self and peer assessment, where students needed to engage at a higher level to ensure that they understood what it was that they needed to do and to achieve those professional standards. Feedback was also given by Kerry as the Director of Professional Practice. They were also allocated a mentor from the Department of Education to ensure that they were being provided with that professional body of knowledge from an outside perspective, because Kerry and I, we knew the students very, very well, but they were allocated this mentor who the students needed to ensure that they build the rapport with this person, but they had to build it in a virtual sense. So just picking up on one thing that Helen spoke about in her keynote address this morning, and it really, really rings home here, of our students just didn't survive this placement experience. They actually thrived through the experience, and I think they're better for it. Kerry, over to you. We don't have much time left.
Thanks, Rickie. Oops. Okay. So just in summary, the idea of a critical task really is defined by what employers expect of a graduate, that they're able to do the job that they've been prepared for. But there's an element of it that also builds students' confidence and understanding and recognition that they have the skills to innovate and work professionally within the role that they adopt. So they've actually got to be metacognitively aware of the knowledge and skills that they've acquired and be confident to know when and how to use them in the real world. So these are some of the actual findings that came out of the students being involved in this process that we hadn't really anticipated from the get-go. These students were actually sent back as part of their process of giving valuable, reliable feedback to each other to get a greater depth of curriculum or content knowledge or the discipline knowledge that supported their professional practice. And that wasn't simply, this is how I want you to do it. They had to problem solve and make the decisions about the best way to respond to an unknown audience that they could. Some of those aspects made them reflect on the type of communication that they might have to use, not only for young children or students who were accessing the resources that they created, but for an audience of parents who were trying to support their children through the remote learning process. So they had to ensure that their language was accurate, concise, clear, and not ad hoc. They actually developed a far greater understanding of professional workers' collegial work, where the interaction with others actually gives you the opportunity to enhance or improve your practice, and obviously created that evaluative thinking where you were really conscious of what you did. In terms of critical action, these students were able to overcome the barriers to teaching people that they couldn't interact with face-to-face by drawing on theories of motivation and engagement and actually designing responsive approaches to connecting with them. And these are all models that can be transferred to the way that we interact with our students when we are trying to teach them in distance locations as well. it requires us not only to consider what we deliver about here's the content, but how we get them to interact with it that develops this level of criticality. So it's a lesson for them and a lesson for us. Just to wind up, some of the implications are to actually remind us of what criticality means in terms of graduate readiness. And that can be summarised as the ability not to just transmit existing knowledge, but to review what you know and use that knowledge and your skills to solve new problems, even those that you couldn't anticipate might be brought forward by a COVID-19 crisis as occurred in 2020. I'll have to wind up there. I will just show you the references that supported this presentation, and thank you very much for your kind attention to our presentation. Thank you, everyone.